Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. Recently I did a video about films that showed the enemy's perspective in famous wars. One of the films I came across was called My Way. It was a Korean film that interestingly enough showed the German perspective of World War II during D-Day at Utah Beach. But that was just one scene in a much larger epic about a Korean conscript and a Japanese officer who fought in 3 different armies and on 3 different fronts all throughout World War II. At the time of the film's release in 2001, My Way was scheduled to be one of the most expensive Korean films ever made, with a budget of over $24 million. It was described by many as the Korean Saving Private Ryan. The story starts off with 2 young boys. One is Korean, Jun Shuk-kim. He and his family are servants living in the Hashigawa family compound in Japanese-occupied Korea and what is now modern-day Seoul. The other boy is Tatsuo Hashigawa. His grandfather is an officer in the Japanese Imperial Army. The 2 boys share a love for running, a reoccurring theme that allows for the director to use ample amounts of slow-motion shots all throughout the movie in true Korean drama fashion. Jun Shuk-kim and Tatsuo would go on to compete in many different marathons as they grew older. But this friendship is shattered when Jun Shuk's father, a butler for the Hashigawa family, hands a package to Tatsuo during a celebration on one of his recent marathon wins. Inside the package was a booby-trapped grenade. It was planted by Korean freedom fighters. Now, Tatsuo's grandfather acts quickly and realizes that this is a booby trap and smothers the grenade with his own body. The event destroys Tatsuo's innocence and his trust for Koreans, including his old friend Jun Shuk-kim and his family, even though they most likely had nothing to do with this attack. Fast forward a bit more, and it's 1938. World War II has already started in Asia with the Japanese invasion of China. Both Jun Shuk-kim and Tatsuo Hashigawa had made a name for themselves as long-distance runners. But the only problem was that the Koreans, despite being colonized by the Japanese, were banned from competing in sporting events. A Korean marathon runner by the name of Son Ki-chung had won gold and set a world record at the Olympics in 1936 in Berlin. He also espoused anti-Japanese sentiment. Despite this ban on Korean runners, Jun Shuk-kim would be sponsored as a runner by Son Ki-chung in an attempt to get another Korean to qualify for the 1940 Tokyo Olympic Games. During the race, Tatsuo Hashigawa would once again go up against Jun Shuk-kim. Jun Shuk-kim, who had been working as a rickshaw driver at this point, ends up winning the race, but is disqualified by Japanese officials who make up some kind of penalty. This infuriates the repressed Korean people in the crowd, and a riot ensues. Jun Shuk-kim and many of the Koreans who took part of that riot were conscripted into the Japanese Kwantung Army in Manchuria. Here, Jun Shuk-kim gets his first taste of battle near a small village in Inner Mongolia known as Nomonhan. This was a hectic and little-known series of battles and skirmishes that occurred between the Soviet and Mongolian forces and the Japanese Imperial Army. Just another small border war that would eventually get rolled into World War II. This was a terrifying place to go to battle in. The plains of Inner Mongolia were completely flat with zero cover. The soldiers were completely exposed to the elements and enemy fire. Mobility was key here, and the Soviets had a huge numerical advantage in both soldiers, tanks, and airplanes. The fighting would be brutal, and in one of the battles, Jun Shuk-kim's commanding officer calls for a retreat. To everyone's surprise, that commanding officer would eventually be demoted to private and then forced to commit seppuku in order to show his loyalty to the emperor. And then, to Jun Shuk-kim's surprise, Tatsuo Hashigawa, his childhood friend turned enemy, takes command of the unit. Tatsuo is a colonel now in the Japanese Imperial Army. The death of his grandfather had made him extremely nationalistic and very bitter against the Koreans, none of whom he trusted. In the next battle, Tatsuo Hashigawa commands 50 men to form a suicide brigade. These were basically individuals with explosive vests on their bodies, and their job was to climb underneath tanks and detonate. The following scenes are pretty horrific. I mean, Japan did have a severe disadvantage in armor during the battles of Kalakin Gol, so it is possible that such mass wave attacks were used by the Japanese. Japan has definitely been known for using such tactics against the Soviets and the Chinese and also the Americans later on in the Pacific Theater, but the Soviets and the Chinese are actually also known for using very similar desperate tactics. But we do have to remember that this is a Korean film and Koreans have been oppressed and colonized by the Japanese on numerous occasions, so they aren't exactly objective about everything here. And so while I don't think these bomb trucks are real, rolling under a tank with explosives strapped onto your chest is definitely much more realistic and most likely happened in many theaters of World War II, as is attacking the track of a tank with explosives on a pole in order to destroy its mobility. Another thing I have to mention is that the Kwantung Army at this point in history was still really well equipped and well trained, and they most likely didn't resort to such tactics unless they were, surrounded and about to be destroyed as a unit. These tactics, however, were commonly used by the Japanese towards the end of World War II when they were running short on manpower and weapons. But anyway, I digress. The important thing here is not the fighting, but it's the futility that Jun Shik-kim feels being forced to fight in a conflict that he has no real stake in. It's shocking to see how little the Japanese officers care about the lives of the Koreans as well. The other theme here is the extreme belief that Tatsuo Hashigawa has in the Japanese Empire. One of his first commands, he basically walks straight into a Soviet trap. The Japanese are met by a superior Soviet armored column and completely overwhelmed. Tatsuo Hashigawa ends up pulling out his pistol and attempts to shoot every retreating Japanese or Korean soldier that he runs across. Overwhelmed by his anger, he keeps on fighting until he and Jun Shik-kim are both knocked out by an artillery shell. The two men awake in an even worse hell. Now they've been transported all the way to Siberia, to a work camp. A place dedicated for prisoners of war, Russian political prisoners, and basically anyone else that the paranoid Stalin thought was scheming against him. Frostbite and the loss of mobility meant death here, and death is represented visually by the huge incinerator in the center of the work camp, which also terrifyingly happens to be the warmest part of the camp because of all the burning bodies. Here we see the continued destruction of the value of human life. In the camp, Jun Shik-kim runs into an old buddy from Korea who used to pull rickshaws alongside him. His name is now Anton, and he's a Korean collaborator assigned by the Soviet guards to watch over his own people. Anton has lost his mind and fully bought into the Soviet cause and will stop at nothing to survive. Even if it means reporting his own Korean friends for stealing, a crime that carries with it the penalty of death. And now, because Anton is in charge, the Japanese officers who have been captured, like Tatsuo Hashigawa, hold no power over the Koreans, and the tables are turned. Tatsuo Hashigawa must eventually come to terms with the fact that the empire he was willing to die for is most likely going to leave him here to rot. Tatsuo and Jun should get caught in another riot and are about to get executed when Germany launches Operation Barbarossa and sneak attacks the Soviet Union. The two men, along with all of the other Koreans and Japanese in the camp, are given an option to join the Soviet army. Tatsuo's illusion of himself as a Japanese officer is finally completely shattered as he dons a padded Soviet jacket along with Jun Shik. The two men arrived just west of Moscow in 1941, during what I'm assuming was the Battle for Moscow, were treated to stereotypical scenes lifted straight out of Enemy at the Gates. The Korean and Japanese conscripts fight amongst each other for limited rifles and ammunition before being sent in human wave attacks against a neatly prepared German position. The resulting chaos is horrific, and Tatsuo sees a bit of his former self in a Russian officer who is threatening to shoot retreating Soviet soldiers, including himself. Meanwhile, Anton has fully drunk the Kool-Aid by this point and leads Korean and Japanese soldiers in a suicidal mass wave attack and is gunned down for his efforts. Jun Shik-kim and Tatsuo Hashigawa find themselves pinned down on both sides by Soviet and Nazi machine gun fire. The futility of this situation really does symbolize the sense of helplessness that the average individual felt during World War II. And in this terrible moment, the two gain respect for one another, and the two friends turned enemies were once again frenemies. Junshik Kim and Tatsuo Hashigawa somehow survive the battle and attempt to cross a mountain range on the way towards German-controlled Russian territory and are captured by a German patrol. Three years later, days before D-Day begins, the two are reunited as a part of the German Eastern Legions, sent to man the Atlantic Wall against the upcoming Allied invasion there. Junshik and Tatsuo are stationed at Normandy, which seems like a good thing because the Allies are supposedly going to attack the Pas de Calais, under 50 miles to the northeast. This was also where the English Channel was at its narrowest. Unfortunately for Junshik and Tatsuo, the Allies had spent a lot of resources creating an illusion that they were going to attack Pas de Calais. Instead, Operation Overlord, as it was called, directly targeted Normandy, and that little plot of beach where they were preparing defenses on would be called Utah Beach. Not to be mistaken for Omaha Beach from Private Ryan, which had much higher cliffs guarding the beach. Utah Beach's German resistance fades away far quicker, as we'll see in the following battle scenes. Although I'm pretty sure when American bombers began saturation bombing of the beach, they were taking enemy AA fire. And also, it wasn't just B-17s flying sorties. The B-26 Liberator and other medium bombers flew low-altitude bombing sorties as well. Junshik Kim and Tatsuo Hashigawa had planned on escaping the battle, but once the shooting begins, a German officer forces the conscripts to fight at gunpoint, a recurring theme in this movie. Eventually, the Japanese and Korean soldier end up escaping from the trenchworks at Utah Beach, but are captured moments later by parachuting American airborne troops. This part didn't happen. These paratroopers had landed the night before under the cover of darkness and are most likely still securing bridges and causeways, at least during the initial first waves at Utah. Director Kang Ji-gyu first came across the idea for the story after seeing the following photo taken on Utah Beach on June 6, 1944 by American forces. Lieutenant Robert Brewer of the 101st Airborne reported capturing 4 Asians in German uniforms. They initially thought this individual was Japanese, but then he told his story. At the age of 18, he was in Manchuria and conscripted into the Kwantung Army. Then he would fight against the Soviet Union in the border disputes. During the Battle of Kalikin Gol, he would be captured by the Soviet Red Army and sent to the Gulag labor camps. In 1942, he was sent to fight in the Eastern Front of Europe against the Germans. And in 1943, he was captured during the Third Battle of Kharkov, at which point he was transferred to the Eastern Battalions and sent to Normandy. Not a lot of information can be found about this man behind me right here. And in 2005, a South Korean documentary actually investigated his life story, and their findings were inconclusive. And so that's probably why so many artistic liberties were taken by the director in the film. But overall, I really enjoyed this film. It's almost like a modern Korean take on the Odyssey. It does a really good job at showcasing all of the horror and destruction World War II created for people all across the planet. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about my video and whether you're gonna go and check out this movie. I highly recommend it. Other than some over-the-top drama, which is, very classic Korean drama style, I think this is an excellent war film and you guys should definitely all check it out. Also guys, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie and you are the protagonist.